Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hello, ghoul friends. Those who are freaky chic, fans of the supernatural, and all things spooky. I'm your host, FandomTraveller87, and welcome back to my channel. My very own dark, creepy corner of paradise, where I dive deep into exploring the world of the unknown, the unusual, the morbid, where we may sometimes have to, at least just for a moment, suspend our disbelief and open our minds to the possibilities that the other world truly does exist. Whether it may be a faint whisper beckoning to you to follow as you hear the howling winds outside your window, or perhaps you may hear a creaking floorboard, and that you may rule off as the house just settling. But it may be someone who is stalking you, watching you as you sleep, all cozy in your bed, unsuspecting of anything that could be potentially dangerous. And it may be something you can't see, but perhaps you can feel its presence. It may be just a mere shadow, a facade. Maybe you have nothing to worry about. And it's okay if you wish to remain skeptic. However, I do implore you, at least for now, if you are listening, please, dear viewer, remain wary of your surroundings. Be alert and be cautious. Because while you can take a risk venturing far into a place that you may be unfamiliar with, or that you may have some knowledge about, there could still be some potential danger. Especially if it is something that you cannot see. And again, if you feel anything out of the ordinary that can't be logically explained, and this feeling can manifest something to appear that could harm you, you run. You run as fast as you can to get away. Or you stay away from that place. There is evil in the world. It comes in all forms. Now, before I continue on with this video, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. And, as always, your support is most appreciated. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe and hit the bell to get all notifications for future uploads. This video is something I hold very dear to my heart because it addresses a very, very, very particular episode that I'm sure some of you may know about, probably have watched when you were younger. Now, everyone should know about Hey Arnold, an orphan kid who lives out in the big city, goes out on adventures with his friends. Now, while some of these adventures are wholesome and comical, there are a few that stand out to be pretty creepy, I should say. Now, this episode of Hey Arnold that is in season 5, it's called The Ghost Bride. And this one has always terrified me to my core. Which is exactly what brings me to this story that I decided to do that is inspired by this episode. But it's much darker and twisted than the original. That, well, a lot of us have seen already. So, I hope you guys enjoy. this creepypasta, the real story of the Ghost Bride, Cynthia Snell, written and narrated by yours truly. Enjoy, and again, thank you. Let's do this. Hey Arnold is one of the few kid shows from the 90s and early 2000s that often has reruns played on Nickelodeon. There is one episode that has always stuck with me since childhood, that always brought me horrifying nightmares. It's titled The Ghost Bride. My parents and I didn't have a working television, so I often had to go to my friend's house. But him and his parents didn't have cable, so we all had to watch VHS tapes. My friend, let's call him George, had a whole collection of them, including Hey Arnold episodes. We both were rummaging through them within a box he kept under his bed. But in the far right corner of his room, there was something sticking out of the metal garbage can. I stood up and walked over to it, digging a VHS tape out of the trash. It was gray with a red sticker on it, and an inscription that said, Hey Arnold, Ghost Bride, date February 14th, 2003. I arched an eyebrow, looking over at George in confusion. The original Ghost Bride episode had aired on November 11th, 2003, and was in season 5 of the show. I knew that for a fact. I asked George about this tape, and he seemed apprehensive about it. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I figured the producers just made some bonus feature material on behind the scenes of this episode. This tape was probably full of scrapped, rejected footage of the Ghost Bride early on, and it was a discarded, rough draft copy that was unedited or something. It was bizarre though, and I of course knew George's dad was a storyboard artist at Nickelodeon as part of the production team, having directly worked with the show's creator, Craig Michael Bartlett. I let my curiosity get the better of me, and even when George tried protesting, I told him to quit being a big baby and asked him what was the harm. I proceeded to turn on the television and I inserted the tape. Then I laid back in my beanbag chair, munching on some popcorn as the usual opening scene music and credits played. Stinky soon gave his spiel about them passing the cemetery and the others stopping at the front iron gates, conversing amongst themselves. This is where things got a little strange, and I noticed George acting a bit paranoid. It was around 10 o'clock and a rainstorm was brewing outside. We get to the part where Stinky said they better get used to walking by the boneyard since they will be buried there someday. Thus Sid responding eerily with, unless you wind up like the Ghost Bride. Then Eugene asks who that is. Now I need to note, the animation style of these characters appeared realistically drawn, like they were actual human beings, and they had different voice actors too. I didn't really understand any of this, but I was intrigued. Also, strangely enough, the screen froze and there was a zoomed-in close-up of the sign above the gate entrance which read, Lilac Grove Cemetery. My eyes widened in shock. The city we lived in was Lilac Grove in the state of New York, and that was the exact cemetery I went to often times with George and his other friends after school. I kept my eyes glued to the screen as it lagged, and the audio cut out a bit. Helga at this point was arguing with Arnold and the other boys about how they should all come here when it got to 1:45, and that there was no such thing as ghosts. The dialogue was certainly both compelling and much different than the original episode. Gerald insisted that if she actually knew the true origins of the Ghost Bride, she would be smart enough to stay away. Helga laughed and mocked the boys for being stupid and foolish for listening to Gerald. Gerald crossed his arms. He stormed over to Helga and hovered over her with a serious expression on his face. 80 years ago, in 1923, he explained, a woman by the name of Cynthia Elizabeth Snell, who was the eldest daughter of a prestigious doctor, fell in love with a drifter whom her father didn't approve of. It was believed that this man was from the mob, and was a playboy who had serious gambling issues. But Cynthia, who reputably had a bad track record of failed relationships, of being cheated on and being taken advantage of, didn't want to lose another chance at happiness. It was said that her younger sister Olivia was badly spoiled and tried to steal everything she could from Cynthia, even the men that Cynthia liked. I was bewildered, and George still wouldn't say anything. He clearly knew something I didn't. What the hell was going on? Gerald continued. It was on the morning of February 12th, 1923, that Cynthia and her husband-to-be were to wed, but he never showed up. She waited hours for him, and eventually she discovered he had eloped with her sister Olivia at another church just outside of town on Valentine's Day. Cynthia became enraged and plotted her revenge. Not only did her groom betray her trust and break her heart, he stole all her money, and her younger sister had turned their entire family against her. A rainstorm hit the following evening. She went over to her closet and put on her wedding dress, then went down to the basement and grabbed a big, sharp axe. Cynthia walked the 13 blocks to her sister's house in the pouring rain. She snuck in through the front door, which was unlocked. She slowly ascended the stairs. Graphic crime photos then flashed across the screen. The bride and groom laid sprawled on their bed, horribly disfigured and barely recognizable. Dramatic piano music was playing, followed by the blood-curdling screams of the couple. That was so deafening, it nearly made me shit my pants. I was mortified. I demanded answers from George. "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to warn you. My parents burned several copies of this exact tape, and I had no idea at the time how serious it was. I learned the hard way, which is why I tried to get rid of it. But it keeps coming back. I think it like attaches itself to the person who views it and wants you to pass it on to the next person, if you don't want to be cursed or something." I asked him how. "I don't know," he replied. I turned back to the screen, and it froze again on the photos of the mutilated bride and groom before it showed the animation of a shadowy figure of a young woman in her 30s tossing rice ominously on the corpses as she slowly rocked back and forth next to them, humming the wedding march. Her face was unseen, but glowing red eyes shone bright within the shadows, and the screen cut to black. The police hollered and broke down the door. They were presumably chasing the woman, and there was a sound of glass shattering. The screen had flashing imagery of a dead body on the ground. It was Cynthia. Her neck was broken. She laid in a puddle of blood. She was surrounded by a crowd of people. Then another glitch, and within 5 seconds, there was a newspaper clipping dated February 16th, 1923. In the picture, a coffin was carried through the cemetery, the body of Cynthia inside it, and another picture that showed her grave. It said, "Here lies Cynthia Snell. She lived her life and went straight to hell." Oh my God. My jaw dropped. Then the episode proceeded with Arnold and his friends inside the cemetery, and they were just casually hanging out, walking down a graveled path. Things were normal again for several minutes, till shit hit the fan. Midnight was nearing, and something compelled Arnold to halt abruptly. He felt he was being watched by someone. He heard humming. An older woman humming. Organ music played as the humming got louder and louder. Arnold could only move his eyes. A fog rolled in, and he couldn't speak. His friends were gone. The clock on the wall in George's room showed midnight, and it chimed loudly. A shadow, an outline of a woman in a flowing veil and dress appeared in the fog. I was trembling, and George huddled close to me as we saw the sheer terror on Arnold's face. The screen cut to black again, and Arnold screamed. We then saw a clip of his silhouette bolting down the path, and we saw him run towards another iron gate on the other end of the cemetery, desperately trying to escape. Then a lime green, bony, rotting hand grasped the back of his shirt tightly, and there was another flashing image. It was the ghost bride in her grotesque, half-skeletal, zombified face with soulless black eye sockets with glowing orbs of crimson embers. Arnold was thrown violently, hitting right smack into a tombstone, and before he had a chance to react, the blade of the axe swooped down, missing his neck by an inch, as Arnold dodged it quickly and bolted. He was running like a madman, calling out to his friends, but no one was answering back. He winced and cried at the terrible pain in his head, as he was suffering from a bad concussion, and he saw a mausoleum up ahead. He heard voices inside and banged on the door desperately, pleading with his friends to let him in. Gerald quickly opened the door and pulled Arnold in before shutting and barricading it again. Arnold was fumbling with his words, and no one could understand what he was saying. About 30 minutes passed, and they all stood silent, wondering what their plan would be to get out safely. They all knew the Ghost Bride was out there, and she was coming for them all. The screen lagged and froze again. The ominous humming started up once more, and it got closer and closer as there were loud whacks of something hard against the metal door. The screen cut to black again, and there were children screaming. There was one final scene. A crime photo of dead bodies covered in white sheets, and a picture of Helga in a wedding dress covered in blood, taken away in handcuffs. The tape then showed the end credits, and I reluctantly took out the VHS tape. I went home after that, and I'd gone up to my room wondering if I should show this to my parents. George told me the only way to get rid of it surely was to pass it on to someone else, so I decided to leave the tape on the doorstep of someone I really hated. And since then, nothing really has happened to me after watching the VHS tape, but I learned some new information. Cynthia Elizabeth Snell did in fact live on the same block as me near my apartment building. The man who owned the boarding house was named Phil, and he had a wife named Gertie and a grandson named Arnold. They had all lived in it 10 years ago before I moved in, and my dad bought the building. George's dad came and visited me and told him that he knew the kids who lived in the neighborhood too. Their names were Eugene, Stinky, Helga, Sid, Curly. This story within the tape, everything we know about the show Hey Arnold, was inspired by real people who shared the same names, who were all murder victims, and that Helga, she was possibly framed or possessed by an evil spirit, the Ghost Bride herself. I need to know more. I know that all of this is absolutely nuts, but Nickelodeon was trying to cover it up and sweep it under the rug. The company didn't want anyone getting a hold of this tape. Somebody was definitely in on it somehow, trying to make sure for so long that not a single person would get a hold of a copy of this tape. Well, if you're wondering, the story may not end here. There may be future updates, so stay tuned. To those who come across this story, I don't care if you don't believe me. All I know is it's up to me to make certain that people know the truth about this episode. That Cynthia Snell, the Ghost Bride, it's all real. And I pray if you are the next person to come across this tape, pass it on, for you may just be spared for what may occur in the future.